Hey there, Struggler here again to bring you another in-depth look at numbers and other madness-inducing properties littering From Software's spaghetti code. In today's video, we'll be exploring all of the unique weapon skills present in both Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree. I've sorted every single unique weapon skill, beginning from the skills that have super armor, along with the most amount of innate poise bonuses, all the way to the skills that have the least amount of innate poise bonuses. You may notice that the tiers share no information about incoming poise damage reduction. All you need to know is that all the weapon skills in the numerical tiers will reduce incoming poise damage by 50%. However, when we descend to the skills that use a level 3 hyper armor modifier, the incoming poise damage reduction ends up being correspondent to the weapon type. If you didn't watch my last video, the IPDR for colossal swords and weapons is 55%. For all other weapons, it's only 35%. Confusing, I know, but it's just how the game works. One last thing before we begin, see those numbers listed in the left part of the numerically labeled tiers? That number represents the exact amount of poise you have when executing these skills. This means that armor plays no factor into how much poise you get with these skills. Now that we're through with that, let's get this party into full swing. In Super Armor tier, we have Blade of Death, Blade of Gold, Thundercloud Form, Bloodblade Dance, Oath of Vengeance, Magma Guillotine, Goldbreaker, both versions of Erdtree Slam, Frenzy Flame Thrust, Wolf's Assault, and Angel's Wings. DLC added Long-Hafted Blink Bolt and Lightspeed Slash. Let's talk about these new DLC skills. Long-Hafted Blink Bolt is insane. If you would imagine Stamp Upward Cut having invincibility on its step-in and super armor on its follow-up, you would have Long-Hafted Blink Bolt. It's not broken by any means, just programmed in an axiomatic and thoughtful manner, unlike the other 95% of weapon skills and ashes in this silly game. Speaking of the latter, Lightspeed Slash. Dear God, where do I start? You know that meme about most video games where the boss's equipment is super yoked when the boss is using it, but when the player gets their hands on it, it's really lackluster? Yeah, this is like the polar opposite of that. Imagine having a fast, chargeable, spammable attack that has super armor, AoE, and it's also on an ultra greatsword. You can't attack with shadow clones like Radahn does, but you can sure rustle some players' feathers with this one. In our next tier, we have Destined Death, Clawflick, Wave of Destruction, Starcaller Cry, Stormkick, and Sorcery of the Crozier. With Shadow of the Erdtree came Solitary Moonslash, Kotaur's Resentment, there's no way I pronounced that right, Spinning Guillotine, Promised Consort, White Light Charge, Golden Crux, Smithing Art Spears, Shadow Sunflower Headbutt, and Mesmer's Assault. All of these skills will grant up to 500 poise upon activation of your hyper armor. The projectile part of Solitary Moonslash will grant level 3 hyper armor, and the follow-up will grant 500 poise. I believe I made a comment about projectile attacks having large amounts of hyper armor in one of my other videos. Consider this Strike 1. Kotaur's Resentment is just waves of gold with less range, slower startup, less active frames, but way more poise. Not bad, but not all that interesting either. Spinning Guillotine is a meme attack, but packs quite a punch, so don't plan on trading with it. Promised Consort is pretty great. For an attack that can withstand 1000 poise damage, it sure has a lot of hitboxes attached to it. This skill perfectly complements a colossal sword's lack of respectable approach. For how fast and how far this attack travels, it has way too much poise in my opinion. Demand respect by carefully prodding at your opponent with this skill, or bulldoze your way through neutral with it. The choice is yours. Golden Crux. I have to applaud whoever programmed this move. They finally made a balanced but viable command grab. How did they do it? They gave a command grab what all From Software command grabs lacked since the dawn of Soulsborne Kiro Core Ring. Root Motion. This attack travels a fearsome distance, immediately demanding respect from any opponent within its range. It even has an attack hitbox that does pretty good damage to anyone that evades the grab box. Along with this, depending on your connection, you can't evade this attack with invincibility frames. Essentially, it's just not contestable at closer ranges. This means that if you want to whiff punish this grab, your spacing has to be on point. Maybe your weapon might not be up to the task. If not, I'd recommend Dragon Communion harpoons. They're surprisingly fast and work really well for whiff punishing at longer distances. My other recommendation would be Red Lightning Pots. While having slower startup, the hitbox on these pots is massive. If you miss a direct hit, the surrounding AoE will deal full damage. Moving on. Smithing Art Spears is like Eruption, but slightly better, possessing more range. Shadow Sunflower is a meme. Mesmer's Assault, excluding the follow-up, is a mid-range projectile with large area coverage and 500 innate poise. Strike 2 from Soft. The follow-up Assault isn't incredible by itself, but if used after its projectile, which if spaced properly will force a roll, the follow-up times perfectly to chase after the first roll, forcing the person on the receiving end of this skill to backpedal or get caught in a flurry of attacks. Spamming roll takes quite a lot of stamina, and if you don't have enough stamina to evade this skill, this could spell trouble for you. Just as a reminder, this weapon skill can withstand up to 1,000 poise damage, without the Bullgoat Talisman. Yeah, it's a great spear that can withstand most colossal weapon attacks. What of it? In our next tier, we have Regal Roar. This weapon skill grants a total 400 poise upon hyper armor activation. More novelty than useful. Its attached boons are much more desirable, however, granting an increase in AR and a new standing heavy attack. These standing heavy attacks get a hyper armor level 3 bonus on activation of its hyper armor. This tier houses Regal Beastclaw and Great Serpent Hunt. Both of these weapon skills grant a poise bonus of 350 upon activation of their hyper armor. Regal Beastclaw is pretty good, large projectile, slow startup, but complemented by a large amount of poise. This is a base game skill, so it doesn't count as a strike. Great Serpent Hunt. I have nothing to say about this skill that hasn't already been said. Moving on. In this tier we had Alabaster Lord's Pull, Ancient Lightning Spear, Bear Witness, Onyx Lord's Repulsion, Ordovis's Vortex, and Siluria's Woe. DLC added Revenger's Blade, Dragon Wound Slash, Weed Cutter, and Devonia's Vortex. These skills will grant 300 poise upon activation of hyper armor. Firstly, Revenger's Blade. The programmer of this skill must have been doped out of their gourd when making this skill. It's a command dash that has 300 poise, infinite tracking, and an attack at the end. Holding the button causes this skill to travel farther. 300 poise is enough to poise through a two-handed Colossal Sword light attack. It's an excellent rushdown skill, second only to Blind Spot and Swift Slash. Let's not begin with those skills. Dragon Wound Slash. Hefty amounts of hyper armor on a fast projectile attack? I'm afraid that is strike 3 from Software. Alright, that concludes today's video. Thanks for watching everybody, and please consider Dragon Wound Slash was crafted perfectly to complement the Great Katana's moveset. Imagine you're backpedaling to pop a bolus because this weapon inflicts bleed buildup. You think you're at a safe distance, you pop a bolus, your opponent predicts this and punishes with a Dragon Wound Slash on reaction. Where have I seen this before? Also, is your Great Katana losing trades to Colossal Swords? Worry not. Press that L2 button and win the trade. This skill just works. Weed Cutter is a similar concept, but it's slightly slower and has less range. It's not the worst, but it's nothing to really write home about. Same goes for Devonia's Vortex. It's like Ordovis's Vortex, but slower and deals more damage. Not bad, but not exceptional either. In our next tier, we had Establish Order, Shriek of Milos, and Gravitas. DLC added Horn Calling. All skills in this tier will grant a poise bonus of 200 upon activation of the skill's hyper armor. Horn Calling is actually really cool. It kinda reminds me of Lightning Bolt, but you can actually do some free aim shenanigans with it. Aim it directly at your opponent, or aim it down to cover yourself and a small surrounding area with active hitboxes. Pretty good for catching roll-ins. Again, not amazing, but definitely a fun and engaging skill to use. Here's another one-skill tier. Unending Dance will grant a player a small poise bonus of 180 upon activation of the weapon skill. However, this poise bonus will disappear shortly after holding down the button, so be careful how you use this. In our next tier, we had Thunderstorm, Zamor Ice Storm, Flowing Form, and Horn Calling Storm. I previously forgot to include Flowing Form into my last tier list, but this weapon skill has always had hyper armor. My bad. Horn Calling Storm is pretty neat. If you were unhappy with Stormcaller's lack of range, this unique skill is exactly like Stormcaller but with more range. In our second to last tier, we have Waterfowl Dance. As much as I hate getting TOD'd in ganks with this, I'm a bit glad the startup has some trace amounts of poise on it. I think 120 is just the right amount for a skill already as powerful as this. Our last tier features I Command Thee Kneel, Taker's Flames, Surge of Faith, Bloodhound's Finesse, Ghost Flame Ignition, Great Oracular Bubble, Bubble Shower, Spinning Wheel, both versions of Aokade's Dancing Blade, Cursed Blood Slice, The Queen's Black Flame, and Mists of Slumber. DLC added Mists of Eternal Slumber, both versions of Rancor Slash, and Blood Fiend's Blood Boon. They really named it Blood Fiend's Blood Boon, huh? I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but for the 10,000 viewers that are new here, Hyper Armor Level 3 is the modifier that gives you the same poise bonus as your charged heavy attack. Of course, this scales with your weapon. Colossal weapons get the most out of this, and of course, medium Hyper Armor weapons get the lesser out of this boon. So, what happens when this modifier is applied to a weapon that has no innate Hyper Armor? As you can see, there are 3 straight swords, a curved sword, and a bugged great spear with laughably low poise bonuses. Well, allow me to break it down. The questionable ones will grant a base poise bonus of 30 along with a 35% incoming poise damage reduction. These skills will use the attached poise reduction properties correspondent to your weapon. So the Colossal weapon skills get a 55% incoming poise damage reduction, Colossal swords get a 55% reduction, and everything else gets a 35% reduction. The poise bonuses of these weapon skills factor in your armor poise, unlike the rest of the skills listed in the numerical tiers and super armor tier. It's best to stack as much poise as you can when using these skills to get the most out of them. That being said, there's not really much new stuff to talk about here. Let's start with Mists of Slumber. Like you, I was curious about the differences between eternal sleep and regular sleep. To put it briefly, attacking PvE mobs afflicted with eternal slumber will not wake them up. Enemies usually wake up after you hit them during their sleep animation. In PvP, all that's different is that eternal sleep drains more FP upon a successful proc. Rank or slash is alright, I guess. A pretty tasteful reuse of assets, it's just spin slash with some added VFX and projectiles. Simple, but effective. If you watched my last video, we went over the anomaly that is the Bloodfiend's Sacred Spear. It's currently bugged as I've stated already, but its weapon skill is pretty neat by itself. It's like Mog's Blood Boon Ritual, but this one tracks like Lightning Bolt, acting as a ranged area of effect that locks onto your opponent's location. I haven't tested it in PvP yet, but from the looks of it, I think you won't be able to strafe or sprint strafe this skill to escape it. Alright, that's everything I've got for this video. If you made it to the end and you haven't already, please consider subscribing. With that, I will take my leave. Thanks for watching. Until next time.